Hey guys! So today I am reviewing How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America by Kiese Lemon. And if you watched my other video where I talked about this book in my book haul, I totally butchered his name, but the proper way to say it is Kiese Lemon. So yeah, just so you guys know. But where do I start with this book? There's so much I want to talk about, but I kind of want to start off by saying I read this book because a lot of you mentioned you wanted me to review it in the comments, and I just thought it would be a great book to read since there's a lot of racial tension going on in our culture right now, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement is pretty big. So I thought this would be a perfect book to read. But I've noticed that lately it's getting harder and harder to talk about race. If you're white and you try to talk about race or defend yourself, you're instantly labeled as racist, and if you're Black and you try to talk about race, you're instantly labeled as a bitter Black person. So race is definitely a hard topic right now, but I think it's a good topic that we all need to talk about. So this book deals with race a lot. I feel like these issues aren't going to get better if we don't talk about them. So that's why I wanted to make this review and kind of keep it as a discussion as well. I wanted to start off the video by saying these are my opinions, and I hope that they don't offend anyone, and I'm not trying to offend anyone. And I hope that in the comments we can keep the discussion positive, because this is really supposed to be a positive discussion about race and hopefully making changes within ourselves and not trying to point fingers at anyone. So let's get started. I don't typically read a lot of nonfiction just because there's this fine line between woe is me or just telling their story. And I think that this book can kind of be argued as a woe is me type book. And I get that there's a lot of instances where he talks about his situation and his mother and how their living situation is not ideal. I think Kiese does a really good job of telling his story, but also making sure that you know that he's accountable for a lot of the things that happen in his life. And while racial profiling does play a significant part, he realizes that his decisions are ultimately what affect his life. While there are a lot of instances that aren't his fault, like for example, there's one time where he gets pulled over after like a concert where the cops say that he threw a rock of crack out of the window, and he didn't, but they, handcuff him, put him in the police car, and he just explains how shameful it felt being in that car and having all the drivers pass him and wondering if, he really did it. And he started to think, maybe I did do it. Am I so far from being this kind of person that would throw a rock of crack out the window? And it's interesting because he's not perfect in this book. He does a lot of things that upset his mother, his grandmother, and he realizes that he's hurting a lot of people. So this book is really interesting because he writes about his life as honestly as anyone can. So I feel like he tries to explore his reasonings for things and explores the decisions other people in his life have made. I really like the story or these essays because they all take different formats. Some of them are letters to his uncle, some of them are letters to his friends or friends that have written letters to him, and it takes on a really interesting collage of all these thoughts and emotions, and I really like that about this book. And sometimes he does get angry and attacks this idea of white entitlement. Like for example, in one of the essays, one of his white neighbors told him, you're not like the others. That really upset him. I think it's something a lot of Black people have heard when they are successful or moving apart from stereotypical norm of what a Black person is supposed to be. And it's not something you want to hear. It's like a slap on the face, like, oh, it's because you're different that you've gotten this far, or that you're this successful. I think it shows how sometimes when people are trying to say something nice, they actually come off as disrespectful, and it's just about learning about each other. He doesn't attack or just blame his situation on race. He also criticizes Black culture and talks about how much it affected his life. There's a lot of essays in the book that talk about rap and hip-hop in the 90s and the difference between New York rap and Southern rap, and He also talks about Kanye West and how even though Kanye West has made a lot of like changes in trying to describe what it is to be Black in America, he fails in some ways to talk about women and how women are objectified. And that he kind of explains is something that as a Black male, you were brought up in that culture that, you know, you didn't rat out your brothers, you didn't talk about, you know, if they were abusing their wives and that sort of thing. It just wasn't talked about. And it was almost, you were loving, you were respecting your brothers if you didn't say anything. He kind of says how that's wrong. Like, loving someone isn't just being nice and always doing what they want, but it's testing them, pushing them to become better people. And most of the time though, while he does criticize white and Black culture, it's mostly criticizing himself and the decisions that he's made. And he fully agrees, you know, I wasn't always perfect. What really makes this book amazing is that it's about correcting and improving yourself. You don't have to be Black to really relate to this book. There's a lot of family values in the book as well. So yeah, I know this book has a lot to it, and I tried to keep this review more of a discussion base because I don't want to reveal too much about what goes on in the book, but I think How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America is a book that everyone should read and then ask their friends to read and talk about it. This is a book that deserves to be discussed, and I can't wait to see what else he starts to write. And there's a really great essay in here about, I think it's one of the last essays in the book, where he talks about how the struggle it took to actually get his first book published, Long Division. And if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it too. But that book is really crazy. So it talks about how, you know, his editor was saying how, you know, you need to make this book a little more mainstream. And that really like wrecked with him, and it was a hard decision whether or not he was gonna get a book published, but it wasn't gonna be the book that he wanted, or he had to accept not getting the book published and continue writing it the way he wanted to. And eventually he did end up getting the book published, but not by that publishing company. And it was, for the most part, I believe, the book that he wanted to. I mean, it's very crazy and very, very much his style. Me as myself as a writer, I feel like that's a hard choice to make, you know, whether or not you really want to say you're published or whether or not you really want to say I wrote the book that I wanted the audiences to read. So I think that's probably the essay that stuck with me the most. And that one really, I mean, it has some stuff to do with race, but it's also about what it means to be a good writer and what it means to be a Black writer, because I feel like Black writers are often pigeonholed into the genres that they can write about. While this is a book that's about race, it's a lot more than that. Great book. I'm glad I read it, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. And let me know in the comments below if you've read the book or if you want to read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have read it, and let's just keep the discussion going in the comments. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye. I'm actually ashamed to say that I haven't read this one, and that's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte.